Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Infinity Train Book 3. The whole idea of the Infinity Train, both sort of Book 1 and the train itself, is to kind of go through it and better yourself, and then when you do, and your number goes down, you leave the train and you're a better person because of this experience. Or supposedly, I've never been on it, but that's what I hear. Book 3 shows you people who don't want to leave. And I think, the whole idea of the train is sort of like this idea of like therapy or something, and wanting to get help and wanting to improve and wanting to be a better person, wanting to get off the train, basically move on from that stage of your life, become more mature theoretically, especially because we're mostly dealing with like kids and stuff in these. I think that with book 3 you have people who are all really with the apex, and with Grace and Simon, they're flat out refusing to get any sort of help and to be stuck on this train for most of their childhood, basically. Each book of Infinity Train, or each season, takes a totally different story than the other one, which I actually really like. I've heard a lot of people say you can watch them in any order. I don't think that's actually true, but they do feel like very independent of one another. And book 1 was very much setting up the plot, the idea of it with Tulip. Book 2 is more of like the idea of identity, and your identity, like what is the identity of people on that train, of being in it, of helping people, like even though the whole idea of the train is not really even concerned with your identity, of MT's identity. And then you get to book 3 and it's like, well, what if people don't want to be helped? And it's sort of like the idea of therapy of someone who like doesn't really want to get help and is just stuck in this perpetual cycle. And that's basically what the apex is, but they've sort of marketed it better than that. Let's be cool, let's like break stuff, let's break all the rules. And, kind of like this whole idea of Peter Pan and the Lost Boys or something like that. But with Grace and Simon, ultimately what they've done, I doubt their families even think they're alive at this point. They basically sacrificed their entire childhood, not be educated, not really have friends other than those experiences, not see their families again. They've basically decided to just break crap and not care about anything. And that has been their lives for, I think it's like 10 years or something. The whole idea of empathy in this season is a big deal. But I don't think it's just about empathy, because it is, but it's kind of the idea of empathy through responsibility. When you first get with Simon and Grace, and then they eventually see Hazel and Tuba, you get this whole idea of, that they, hate, nulls, which are the denizens or the creatures created in the train, but they really want Hazel to come with them because she's a kid. And they, let Tuba come along, even though Simon hates Tuba, and something fucked up's gonna happen and stuff like that. I'll try not to spoil stuff, but I don't know why you're watching a review of something that like that, like this. Maybe it's not the best idea to be watching if you haven't seen the show. But like and subscribe. They take on Hazel, and they bring her with them to bring her as part of the Apex. But I think, there's a lot of talk, online about this season between Simon and Hazel and Tuba, because Tuba is awesome. It's like a purple gorilla with tubas on their arms. I played the tuba in middle school, and I like gorillas, so this is like perfect for me. Tuba is also a great character. I would like to see more of Tuba at some point. But this season's kind of obviously about a lot of things. It's not just about one thing, but I think the main kind of crux of it, the main thing, the person that this is about Grace. Because Grace's experience and Grace's involvement in things is how she's pretty much the protagonist who starts all of the action throughout this whole thing. She's the one who starts the apex. She's the one who finds Simon. She's the one actually who has the memories of the original conductor, not the false conductor, as they say, 1-1. She is the start of all of it, and she's been very charismatic. She's very loving. She, teaches these kids in a way that, sounds very coercive and stuff. But she hasn't dealt with her responsibility in all of this. And that's sort of what makes the character of Grace really interesting, is because she's pretty much the protagonist, let's say. There's like a lot of characters and stuff, but she's who you're following, and you feel bad for her, and she's starting sort of learning the error of her ways, but you're almost feeling like Simon's sort of like the bad guy and stuff. But when you look at the Simon character, who, kind of agitated him up and made him into sort of who he is, and not that he doesn't have any choice in the matter or free will, but it seems like she encouraged this sort of behavior. She saved him. She told him these things about the conductor, which he did not see. He just, sort of believes this nonsense and has almost fallen in love with this legend that she created. And the idea of realizing the error of your ways when you left not only yourself astray, but so many of those people and so many of those kids who are not off the train. Instead, they're like hanging out in a busted ass mall and like destroying robots and stuff. I think the idea of empathy, especially now that a lot of people, it's hard for people to have empathy over people they disagree with or politically don't align with, or, obviously what we see with racism and everything like that is all a lack of empathy. And when we look at Infinity Train Book 3, this feels like it's directly talking about kind of the lack of empathy in our own society, the responsibility one would have if they were sort of promoting culture like that. And Grace is pretty much doing that. If she didn't do it herself, she was one of the main people behind it in itself. And for her to realize, like, oh, well, this is this null, basically, this null there's bringing along. I guess I am going to spoil stuff. There's no way around it. But so stop watching, I guess. If you haven't seen this, sorry. Spoilers and all that. But as soon as she sees Hazel and realizes Hazel's a null and she cares for her, she realizes sort of the error of her ways. But she's already too far gone. She's already too deep. We've seen what she can do with Simon. We see what she can do with the Apex. And this is both questioning the lack of empathy in other people, but it is also questioning the people who created that lack of empathy, that created that kind of fear-mongering, which she definitely did, that created that sense of paranoia. And I think she definitely did it for her own self-interest, which were that she didn't want to go back. She felt totally ignored where she was before this, in this like rich house or whatever, and she doesn't want to go back there. So rather than, maybe Simon would have gotten off the train. I think about that a lot. Now, Simon has his own free will and is also a complete asshole, but that's a whole different thing. But I do really feel like Grace is so important to this plot, and it's interesting because you almost feel like the story of every book of Infinity Train is one protagonist, all three been female so far, and her arc of sort of finding herself, the better end of it, whether it's Tulip, MT, or Grace. And in Grace is probably the most troubling and problematic character of the three, because she changed a lot of people's lives knowing that she didn't want to go back and deal with her life before, putting that off. And at the age she is at this point, I think she's probably had these thoughts before, but she's having so much fun, she doesn't really want to deal with it. And the idea of Hazel has made her do so. And seeing, even Amelia and seeing what Simon becomes and all these things kind of shows sort of the errors of both her ways, but the ways that she sort of promotes. And, in the end, when she decides like, oh, well, no, we need to do things better. We need to be better. I'm going to be the real leader. I'm going to use my leadership roles, my power of leadership to do something positive rather than negative. So in a lot of ways, she is kind of that idea of leadership who, regardless if you disagree with them or not, even if they are able to evoke passion in people or fear-mongering or something, if they're able to recognize the error of their ways. And I think that's what Grace does. I'd really like to see like what happens to her. This is probably one of the few I'd actually really like to see a continuation of. The other ones are pretty much like open, closed, that's the end of the book, whatever, sort of. This one, I'd actually like to see her have to sort of deal with trying to get off the train. And like, I'm sure when she gets back, they're going to be like, where the fuck have you been? I'm like, does she go back to being a kid? I don't think so at this point. That would be weird. But she's going to use that power she has over these children to get them off. Or maybe she gets them all off and she stays. But regardless, I feel like if she did, her number would be up, so whatever. But I think she saw how far she could push people and how far that road went, but also showed that she, I think she actually did care when she was confronted with the fact that these things actually had feelings, although I think she had been confronted with the fact before. But this is the idea of empathy and dealing with the fact of having empathy and a responsibility in that. And I think a lot of times, a lot of people don't. And what I love about Infinity Train, what Owen Dennis does, is he takes on this writing and he takes on what older science fiction did. But I think this is, complicated, nerdy, dorky, what I call basement sci-fi before sci-fi was cool and big blockbuster and stuff like that. But at the same time, this is very much, they're all like fables. They're all like these nice little fables where you have a lesson that you go through that teach you a moral lesson. And the moral lesson I really got from this is the responsibility of empathy. That's what I keep thinking about with this, is like you're knowing to be empathetic and cutting that self off and just destroying these things despite them like pleading for help, like don't destroy me and stuff like that, even if they're not real theoretically. You're still showing a complete lack of empathy. And the fact that she went from being a primarily selfish person, and she sort of wasn't completely because of the whole Apex thing, but I think she went from doing that with selfish motivations to realizing the power that she actually had. I like how each of these books take on like sort of a different personality, a different kind of tale. Each one is completely different from, going from, a normal passenger to a denizen to someone who doesn't want to get off, are completely different stories within the same kind of structure. And that's really, really great and shows you, the possibilities of really good sci-fi fantasy writing. Owen Dennis should probably write for Doctor Who. That would be great. That's who I want to do it. But what I loved about this season was the idea of talking about empathy and how much power empathy has and how much power empathy says about our own humanity. Because without that, how human are we? What's kind of interesting is, as much as they're against these nulls and treat them like they aren't human, how they learn their humanity is actually through them. That might also be because they're so disconnected. They needed something like that to do it, but it also brings the idea of like what is human, what is consciousness, and you should have empathy for consciousness in general, not just because it's human, but that's like a whole other thing. But I think what Infinity Train is saying about empathy and the idea of it, what they're saying about empathy is like your lack of empathy is what will kind of like lead you astray, not let you be the full person that you can be. In a way, she learned who she could really be. And I think in some ways she learned the whole passenger arc, even if she isn't off the train. I really like Infinity Train. It's such an amazing show. I like what Owen Dennis is doing with science fiction. It's probably my favorite science fiction show on right now because it's weird, it's interesting, it's odd, it's very animated. It seems like he isn't as concerned with the train cars in this one. He's more concerned with the plot lines, but that's fine. It feels like he jumps around on what he wants to do from each book. It's very much an anthology show, almost like they're their own limited series, but within this whole world. I think I would like to see one that didn't just exist within this structure that we've seen from book 1, book 2, book 3. They're all interconnected. I would like to see like, hey, how did this train start? What was it like for the Infinity Train in the 1970s? Something like that. I'd like to expand beyond that, but I like it within its own world. And I think it's really powerful at jumping around between plot lines and everything like that. I think there's a lot of power in what it's doing and saying, and be able to switch between these plot lines and say a lot about kind of personalities and of course empathy, which I think is the main important part, and what kind of hits you so hard is realizing the evil people can do without it and the power they can have with it. So if you have seen Infinity Train book 3 and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. Thank you.